It seems like an absolute eternity since I got my hands on DJI's Pocket 4P. But after a rather protracted launch around the world, I'm now able to give you my final thoughts on this device. Now, I'm not going to go into every single feature. There are numerous reviews all over YouTube that go into all the different features of this camera. What I want to focus on is what it's like to use, especially compared with Insta360's Lunar Ultra. Is D-Log2 really worth the hype? Is it a useful feature to have on this camera? And can a device like this replace your mirrorless camera for day-to-day general video work? The answer to that is fairly nuanced, but let's get into it. Okay, so although I'm not going to go into every single last feature of this camera, as per always, I have uploaded original footage direct from it that you can download and practice grading for yourself, and I've put that link in the description. So if you want to play around with the footage, go ahead, be my guest. And I've also dropped in some comparison footage there with the Lunar Ultra as well, so you can do a direct comparison yourself between the two cameras and the low light mode and various other modes. Okay, so the Pocket 4P and the Pocket 4 are fairly similar in terms of the overall interface. The Pocket 4P, because it has two cameras or two lenses, has a new zoom button next to a custom button. Now, right off the bat, we see some differences here between the 4P and the Lunar Ultra. The Lunar Ultra's custom buttons are attached to the LCD, so no matter which orientation you put the LCD, you've always got access to them, and there are two custom buttons too. In comparison, the 4P only has one custom button, and that, along with the zoom button, will get covered up if you change the orientation of the LCD display. So that's a bit of an annoyance, particularly if you're shooting a lot of vertical video. You won't have access to those buttons, whereas you would do on the Lunar Ultra. Speaking of the zoom button, I don't find it quite as intuitive as the Lunar Ultra to switch between the different lenses and the different zooms. And that's because the Lunar Ultra has a load of different options. You can control it on the LCD display, or you can control it with the rocker switch, and that allows you to do a smooth zoom as well. In contrast, on the Pocket 4P, you cycle through the zoom functions and it'll go from 1x to the 3x zoom and then to 6x. Curiously, it bypasses the 2x lossless zoom on the first lens and jumps straight to 3x. I would like to see the option of using 2x. I know DJI doesn't fully describe these digital zoom modes as lossless, but because they're zooming in to the sensor or cropping into the sensor on an almost pixel by pixel basis, they are effectively lossless regardless of the lack of marketing speak. So I would like to have seen that. But the other difference is because you have to cycle through the different zoom modes with the button before you can return back to the 1x lens, it's not quite as quick to work with as a Lunar Ultra. You can press the LCD display, of course, but it's just not as intuitive, I find. Now, if you do want to use the 2x zoom on it, on the first lens, then you will need to switch the zoom to the manual mode, and that's controlled by the joystick. And although you can easily go to the 2x zoom in this way, it is a bit fiddly. It's often quite hard to hit precisely the 2x setting. You always end up at like 1.9 or 2.2 or whatever. So it's really hard to hit that 2x zoom bang on. So I would like to see that option in the menu to be able to add it through the list of zoom modes that the camera will cycle through when you press the magnification button. The close focus and macro capability of the 4P are fairly close to the Lunar Ultra. I don't think the focus distance is quite as close as the Lunar Ultra, but still it's respectable and very comparable to its rival. And that's great because it means you can get close-ups of all kinds of things, from insects to plant leaves and all that sort of thing. So it really does give the camera a lot of creative options when it comes to getting different angles and creative shooting. There is a 12x zoom available, and that is obviously doing quite a large crop onto the sensor. You will lose quality when you use this mode, but having said that, if you did need it at a pinch, the footage is pretty usable. There is a noticeable degradation in quality. The image becomes softer and you can see a bit of noise there. but in good light, it is passable and you can use it. Very similar to the Lunar Ultra in that regard. The joystick control on the 4P is a bit more precise than the Lunar Ultra. That's because the 4P's joystick has variable positioning, whereas the one on the Lunar Ultra is either on or off in each direction. So you can precisely control the speed with the Pocket 4P on its joystick control, and that's pretty useful if you want to do any actual camera moves such as a pan or a tilt. With a bit of practice, you can get a smooth start and stop to those panning and tilting motions. Now, things become much more competitive between the two cameras when it comes to the picture profiles. Now, as anyone who watches my channel knows, I'm not a big fan of the standard color profiles in any of these cameras, and the Pocket 4P is no exception. I find that the standard color profile looks far too digital and overly sharp, even when you dial back the sharpness setting within the picture setup menu. And this is a problem because unlike the Lunar Ultra, you can't use D-Log in any of the slow motion modes. You can only use it in the standard video mode. It's not available in time-lapse and it's not available in the ultra slow motion modes. And for me, this vastly reduces the usefulness of the slow motion modes, because if I'm shooting log in most of my other footage and I want to do some slow motion shots, I want it to match in look. And if it was just the color that was different, that would be one thing, but it's a fact that you do get these edge enhancements going on and this kind of HDR merging that is happening with the tone mapping on the standard color profile that you don't get with D-Log. So if you are shooting D-Log and then you want some slow motion, matching the color in those shots is going to be really hard to do. And given that the P in 4P apparently stands for Pro, I would have expected this model to be able to do log in the slow motion modes as well. When you compare that to the Lunar Ultra can do iLog in 10-bit in all of the modes pretty much, including the slow motion modes. The only mode that it can't do it in is the low light mode. So this is a pretty big issue for me. I was looking forward to this camera having log available in the slow motion modes, because it was the same on the standard Pocket 4, where you'd go to the 240 frames per second mode and you would be left with the standard color profile as your only option. If the 4P had 240 frames per second available with D-Log, that would have been a pretty big selling point over the Lunar Ultra. So it's confusing to me as why that isn't the case, why it doesn't have that ability. Maybe it's a difference in capabilities of the processing chip that's inside the 4P compared with the Lunar Ultra. I don't know. Maybe it's something that could be added in a firmware. I did hear originally that on the Pocket 4, there were plans to introduce log in the 240 frames per second mode, but we haven't seen that yet. So I'm not going to pin any hopes on the 4P getting this either. And that is such a shame. It's such a missed opportunity. Okay, so what about D-Log 2? Is this worth the hype? Does it add anything to the camera? Well, first off the bat, D-Log 2 has a claimed 17 stop dynamic range, which puts it pretty much in the same territory as an ARRI Alexa. And I have seen some technical comparisons where people have actually profiled D-Log 2 properly and scientifically, and they have determined that it is pretty close to ARRI's system. Having said that, we are talking about a 10-bit recording system, and 17 stops of dynamic range theoretically pushes the upper limits of what a 10-bit recording system would be capable of. I haven't seen any banding or any issues myself yet, but a lot's going to depend on how you expose that footage. But having said that, D-Log 2 is extremely impressive in my estimation. It grades really nicely, especially now that there are some LUTs available from Gamut, which do the transform either to Rec 709 or into DaVinci Wide Gamut color space, so that you can grade it properly until Blackmagic Design itself manages to put D-Log 2 actually within Resolve, but the footage that I have tested with D-Log 2 has an incredibly impressive amount of latitude to play with, and from my tests it copes pretty easily with even a +2 EV exposure setting on the camera, and even -2 EV as well. When you go to +3, things will clip out, but at +2 EV I've been finding that I can recover the picture very easily indeed. And this means that you've got some scope for overexposure there to be able to keep your shadow noise quieter as well. So there is a lot to work with D-Log 2 in that regard. The problem is that you can only use it on the 1x lens, and you can't even use the digital zoom when you're using it. I presume this is because the sensor has a quad Bayer arrangement and it probably uses a dual gain output similar to GoPro's Mission 1 Pro, so that it can actually achieve that high dynamic range. The trouble is that if you are shooting in log for the rest of your shoot, you have that mismatch between D-Log 2 and the standard D-Log when you're using the other lens. So again, you're going to have, or potentially have, some issues matching your footage throughout a shoot. And also, if you're going between the two different lenses quite frequently, which you probably will if you're a self-shooter and you're doing travel videos and that sort of thing, you will want to get a variety of different angles, and switching between the 1x and the 3x lens is something that I personally have found myself doing all the time. When you have the camera set to D-Log 2 on the 1x lens, you can't just zoom in to 3x and have it automatically switch off. You have to go into the menu and switch it to D-Log or the standard color profile before you then go back out and then switch to the different lens. And this adds faff, and it's just adds complexity to something that shouldn't be that complicated. I would like to see in a future firmware update for DJI to implement an automatic change. So if I have it in D-Log 2, if I press the zoom button to go to the 3x zoom lens, I want it to automatically just switch to D-Log. And then when I go back to the 1x lens, automatically switch to D-Log 2. But in general practice, what I've found myself doing is just keeping the camera in standard D-Log because it's a lot less hassle. And then I only switch to D-Log 2 if there is a particularly demanding shot where I really do need that added dynamic range. And I think that's probably how most people are going to use it, rather than as a default mode that they go to. And that is such a shame. I understand why, because the two different lenses on the camera use two different sensors, and the 1/1.3 inch sensor is just not capable of doing that dynamic range, so it can't have D-Log 2. But in a future camera, it would be amazing to see a camera with two of these 1-inch sensors at different focal lengths, so that we can finally have D-Log 2 throughout. As it is, because you'll probably find yourself using D-Log 2 sporadically, it is a little bit of a gimmick, but perhaps a glimpse of what is to come in future cameras of this type. Now, when you switch to the D-Log 2 mode, you can only use a fixed ISO, so there's no auto ISO when you use D-Log 2. You get the maximum dynamic range of D-Log 2 when you set it to ISO 1600, but the best all-round balance is around ISO 400, and that gives you the best balance between noise in the image and also the dynamic range. When it comes to remotely controlling the Pocket 4P, you have a couple of options. You can use your smartphone, or you can use the optional remote control. Now, the Lunar Ultra famously has a detachable LCD and control system, which is absolutely amazing. It has an integrated microphone, so you can get good audio from a distance from the camera, and you've got access to the full controls of the system. And it's an absolutely genius design. It's absolutely fantastic, I think. One of the best features of the Lunar Ultra. The optional remote control for the Pocket 4P, on the other hand, isn't so well thought out. It's an extra thing that you need to keep charged up, for one thing, and every time you want to use it, you have to wait for it to connect to the camera. Now, the connection is pretty quick, but it's still an extra thing you have to wait for. You can't turn the camera on and off from the remote like you can with the Lunar Ultra system. The LCD display on the remote is also pretty difficult to see. It's small, and in outdoor sunshine, it's really hard to see the image, but there are even more problems than that with it. For one thing, you can't control most of the settings on the camera. You can change between different modes such as video mode and stills mode and slow motion, but you can't set up the picture. You can't change to D-Log or the standard color profile, and you can't even change your frame rate or resolution either. It's bizarre to me why this is the case, why it's been designed in this way, because if I'm remote from the camera and I want to control it from a distance, those are the very functions that I might want to change, and they've been completely omitted from this design. And I was hoping that, before I did this review, I'd do a firmware update and maybe they would have added that capability, but nope, I'm on the latest firmware and you can't control those settings from that Osmo remote system. So because of that, I can't really recommend it as a must-have accessory. It's a real shame, and these omissions I would have thought were pretty basic stuff. And because of its size, it's also something extra to lose as well. On the other hand, focusing options on the Pocket 4P are slightly better than those on the Lunar Ultra. For example, on the Pocket 4P, you can register subjects, so you can register your face or any particular subject's face that you're filming, and you can set the camera to the registered subject focus mode, and that will ensure that the camera is focused on those people rather than anyone else who might be around you. And so, that gives you a bit more peace of mind when it comes to the auto-focusing system, and it's something that isn't found on the Lunar Ultra. Another area in which the Pocket 4P wins over the Lunar Ultra is with the onboard storage. It has almost double that of the Lunar Ultra at around 100 gigabytes, and I find myself predominantly using it rather than an SD card. In the past, DJI's cameras have saved me many times by the fact that they do have generous built-in storage, and even with the cost of RAM now, it's really good to see that DJI is carrying this on. It doesn't seem to have affected the price of its products too much either. So it's really good to see this continuing, and I find it really useful and very handy. Now, when it comes to filters, the Pocket 4P has a sort of cover thing on the front of the lenses, and it can be a little bit tricky to remove. It's a bit more fiddly than the Lunar Ultra, and it's something else to lose. So if you're using filters with the Pocket 4P, you have to take that off before you attach the filters to it, whereas with the Lunar Ultra, they just go on the front of the device as is. So it can be a little bit fiddly, but you can still fit the filters to the camera. Another aspect in which the Lunar Ultra has a bit of an edge is with the wind filtering and the onboard audio, and that's because the Lunar Ultra has a physical wind filter built into it, whereas the Pocket 4P doesn't have any physical wind protection at all. So your onboard recording in windy conditions isn't going to be quite so good with the Pocket 4P. It's going to be reliant on the digital filtering, which frankly isn't brilliant on any of these cameras at all. But if you are going to be serious about your audio and you're going to be talking to camera outside, then by all means you need to invest in one of these wireless microphones. That will give you just such better quality audio. I think they are absolutely essential for any of these devices. But with time-lapse, on the other hand, the Pocket 4P is definitely better than the Lunar Ultra. For example, you can do motion lapses, which means that you can set the beginning and end point of a shot so that you can have movement within your time lapses, and it's just not possible yet on the Lunar Ultra. I'm not sure whether Insta360 would add that in firmware later, but currently the 4P is more versatile for time-lapse use, particularly because you've got a choice between video recording and raw image recording as well. So let's return to the question I asked at the beginning of this video about whether these sorts of cameras can replace your mirrorless camera in day-to-day video work. The answer is pretty nuanced because it really depends on what you need to do with a camera. Certainly, I can see these cameras being integrated within shoots with larger cameras. The image quality on them is just getting so much better, and it's at a point now where the image quality is beginning to rival that of some mirrorless cameras, and particularly now that we've got the likes of D-Log2 on the Pocket 4P. If that's an indication of where things are going, then I think we have a pretty interesting future ahead for this type of gimbal camera. Unlike a mirrorless camera, you don't have the full choice of focal lengths, so you haven't got that lens flexibility. And one of the biggest limitations for me about any of these gimbal cameras is the fact that they aren't weatherproof or dustproof. Now, you could probably take them out in a little bit of drizzly rain, but I wouldn't want to take them out in a heavy downpour or in a situation where they might fall into the water. It's one of the things that I was hoping would come with this latest generation of cameras, but we're still yet to see it. And for me, because I film a lot outdoors, it is a pretty significant limitation for me. And it means that if I'm doing a vlog or any kind of outdoor filming, I still go back to using an action camera for that peace of mind that I know that if the weather changes, my filming doesn't have to stop. Now, both the Pocket 4P and the Lunar Ultra each have their issues. Some of the issues on the Lunar Ultra, I believe, have been worked on by Insta360. Now, with the Pocket 4P, the image quality is absolutely fantastic, but I think some of these little nuances and issues need to be looked at by DJI, potentially with a firmware update. When it comes to log in the slow motion modes, I'm not sure whether it's physically possible because I don't know whether that's a limitation of the chip that's inside it. But I did hear previously that the original Pocket 4 was going to have log implemented in a firmware update for its slow motion mode. So maybe that is a possibility on the horizon, but I wouldn't put any stake in it because, you know, we have to see when it happens and if it happens. Now, it probably sounds like I'm being pretty harsh on the Pocket 4P, but that's only because the competition is so fierce now. And with the Lunar Ultra, you know, you can use iLog in all of the modes, including slow motion, and that's a pretty big limitation of the 4P when compared to the Lunar Ultra. And, you know, as I say, competition is very tight and is very fierce now. So any of these small differences can tip the balance as to whether you're going to go for one camera or the other. Now, if you don't have a need for slow motion or the standard color profile doesn't bother you, you might be filming mostly in the standard color profile and don't want to be bothered with grading, then the Pocket 4P and the limitations on those picture profiles and the slow motion modes are not going to bother you too much. You've still got access to the full tracking ability at 240 frames per second. And, you know, that is a really nice slow motion mode to have. So if you're in that kind of camp when it comes to filming, then those limitations aren't really going to apply to you. But personally, because I prefer shooting in the log profiles, they look more natural to me. Even if I'm just doing a basic Rec 709 transform, I prefer to use that mode. I just think it looks less digital. I think it looks a bit more filmic. So I prefer to shoot that way. So these limitations and omissions are a pretty big deal to me when I'm considering which camera to use. But with all those criticisms aside, the image quality, as I say, from these cameras is getting better year on year. And if we can assume that perhaps a future Pocket 5P might have a dual 1-inch sensor, perhaps with D-Log2 on both lenses, that would be a big advance in image quality and grading ability. Perhaps maybe we might even see some intra-frame recording, but I'm not going to hold my breath. But anyway, if you've enjoyed this video and you found it useful, I know it hasn't been my usual completely in-depth nerd out on these things, but there is so much content out there on the Pocket 4P. I wanted to concentrate on what I found the nuances and differences between these cameras to be in a practical sense. But if you've got this far in the video and you're not subscribed to my channel, please do consider doing so and leaving me a like. As I say, I've got some original files from the camera and I've put the link to those in the description below, and I do have some affiliate links, so if you want to use them, if you're interested in any of these products, it goes a long way to helping me keep this channel going and literally keep the lights on. So I would really appreciate that. But anyway, that's it for now, and I'll see you all in the next video.